And I'm really concerned that the failure to provide this evidence or to attest to chain of custody, in fact, amounts to a cover-up.
This may look like a heated exchange over one tragic case, but it's actually a constitutional stress test. What's really being tested here is whether federal power remains accountable when lethal force intersects with state jurisdiction, when evidence is withheld, cooperation stalls, and oversight becomes confrontation. The issue stops being about one investigation and starts becoming about structural imbalance. This raises broader questions about executive authority, state sovereignty, and the limits of federal insulation from scrutiny. In this video, we'll break down how a dispute over evidence access evolved into allegations of institutional concealment, and why this clash could redefine how federal enforcement agencies are overseen going forward.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here this morning. General Ellison, I want to ask you about law enforcement generally, and especially as it applies here as a former Attorney General myself and a former United States Attorney. I'm very concerned about the lack of working together, not just coordination or cooperation, but actually joint work together here. You know, this is routine because law enforcement is not about red and blue. It's about trying to apprehend and prosecute wrongdoers, to deter others, to punish the ones who did it. We've been told this morning that Operation Metro Surge is over, but this issue is much bigger than just Minneapolis. It's about an out-of-control agency that is imposing brutality and violence in neighborhoods across the country. And the hearing that we held, the spotlight hearing last week, had witnesses who were shot and shot at, U.S. citizens with no criminal background whatsoever, in Chicago and California. This kind of brutality is happening across the country. So I think it really is a national issue. I appreciate your leadership on a national level to try to bring some sanity and rationality here. You were asked earlier by Senator Peters about the lack of cooperation in the investigations of Renee Good and Alex Preddy's death. Absolutely tragic, but it's not just a lack of cooperation, I believe. Hasn't the federal government actually impeded your efforts to investigate by withholding evidence that was provided by state and local authorities and now is kept from you when you want to undertake a legitimate law enforcement investigation? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Senator, we certainly hope this situation does change. But up until now, particularly on the Good matter, we have been denied access to critical evidence in the case to evaluate it. Information like the car, the gun, shell casings, other critical information needed to complete an evaluation and an investigation we simply haven't had access to. We hope this changes. And you mentioned the presence of Tom Homan. I can tell you that with Secretary Noem and with Mr. Bovino, we didn't have any engagement at all. Perhaps now, with somebody who has experience of their own in law enforcement, we can make some progress. I'm hopeful, but up until now, the situation is, as you described, we've been denied access to critical information. We need to complete an investigation.
And the denial of information raises the issue of what is happening to that evidence. We know, having tried cases, that presenting it in court involves establishing a chain of custody, so as to show there was no tampering with the evidence, which is critical in crimes like the ones that allegedly were committed in the alleged murders of Preddy and Good. That kind of chain of custody, the preservation of the integrity of the evidence, is critical to any prosecution or conviction. And I'm really concerned that the failure to provide this evidence or to attest to chain of custody, in fact, amounts to a cover-up.
You know, a lot of Minnesotans have used that word, Senator, and I hope that we can, my biggest hope is we can move on from here. I think everybody who's ever done police investigation, crime investigation, knows that there is a state interest and a federal interest. That's why collaboration is the norm. And I think that most people know that that information has got to be shared with everybody who has an interest in establishing truth in public safety. The fact that we haven't been doing it in this situation, I'm hoping that with the help of this committee, with the help of Mr. Holman perhaps, that we're going to get into a better place. But so far, we've been denied. And it's deeply disappointing because, as you know, when anytime somebody is killed in your state, I mean, you, along its distinguished career in Connecticut, you know that that leaves a massive hole in community, and to simply not investigate it, say there's nothing to see here. We've heard from the second most important official at DOJ that they're not going to investigate the Renee Good case, that they are not going to investigate at all. And I would hope that this committee would say, no, we do expect that when Minnesotans or anybody of any state is killed, particularly in connection with an officer-involved matter, that there will be an investigation. And it'll be fair, and it'll be thorough, and it'll be joint. And then whatever the results are what the results are. But the fact that they're not going to investigate, and local officials in large numbers have quit because of the conduct of the recent conduct of the DOJ, this is all deeply disturbing, and I hope we can turn the corner.
I appreciate the measured and insightful tone that you were bringing, and the message of hope. You've used that term a number of times. The people of Minnesota deserve hope that things will now change, and I hope that they will. I think the nation hopes that they will. But in the meantime, the failure to investigate the Good killing, and in fact, I believe that the investigation is focused on Renee Good's family.
That's right.
Insofar as there is any investigation, it's of her sister and possibly her family. I find absolutely abhorrent and incomprehensible. So I think there is a need for real reform in the Department of Homeland Security, which we are endeavoring to do, as you know, with common sense, restraints, and far-reaching overhaul of this agency that right now is out of control and needs to be reined in. But in the focus on this action in Minneapolis, I hope professionalism, such as you brought to this effort, will prevail. And again, my thanks to you and Mr. Schnell and Mr. Niska for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
In that tense exchange before the committee, Senator Richard Blumenthal looked across the dais and asked a question that cut to the core of federal accountability. Was the federal government not merely uncooperative, but actively impeding Minnesota's investigation into the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Prey by withholding critical evidence? It was not a rhetorical flourish. It was a direct challenge to the integrity of a system built on shared authority and mutual trust. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison's response was measured but unmistakable. Yes, he confirmed, access to key evidence had been denied. The car, the firearm, shell casings, foundational elements in any investigation involving a loss of life. These are not technicalities, they are the building blocks of truth. Without them, no prosecutor, state or federal, can reconstruct events, establish responsibility, or assure the public that justice is more than a promise. Blumenthal, a former United States attorney himself, understood the implications immediately. He spoke not as a partisan voice, but as someone who has stood in courtrooms and defended the chain of custody as sacred. Evidence must be preserved, it must be traceable, it must be protected from tampering or doubt. Because once trust in that process erodes, the foundation of justice cracks with it. What emerged from this hearing was not simply a disagreement over policy, it was a revelation of institutional fracture. Law enforcement in America has always required collaboration, state and federal authorities working in tandem, particularly in officer-involved incidents. That cooperation is not optional, it is structural. When one arm of government withholds material information from another, the question becomes unavoidable: what is being protected? And at what cost? Ellison spoke of hope that new leadership might open doors that have thus far remained closed. But hope, in the context of a fatal incident, is a fragile substitute for transparency. The families involved are not asking for optimism. They are asking for answers. And when the Department of Justice reportedly declines to investigate, when local officials resign in frustration, when state authorities are denied access to evidence necessary for a lawful inquiry, the silence grows louder than any testimony. Blumenthal went further. He warned that the failure to provide evidence, or even to attest to its proper custody, begins to resemble concealment. He did not throw the word lightly. In the American legal tradition, concealment is not just an administrative failure, it is an ethical breach. Because justice does not depend solely on verdicts. It depends on process, on openness, on the public's belief that no agency, no badge, no department operates above scrutiny. This is the tension now gripping the country. Immigration enforcement is, without question, a federal responsibility. But the use of force, particularly when it results in a death, transforms that responsibility into something larger. It becomes a matter of constitutional accountability. It becomes a test of whether power can restrain itself, whether authority can submit to review. Blumenthal framed it as a national issue, not confined to Minneapolis, not limited to Illinois or California. When federal agents operate in neighborhoods across the country, their actions carry the full weight of the federal government. And when incidents occur, the public expects the highest standard of investigation, not resistance, not opacity. Ellison's words were calm, but the gravity beneath them was unmistakable. A state interest and a federal interest coexist in these cases. That is not a political statement. It is a constitutional reality. The system was designed with shared sovereignty precisely to prevent unilateral control. Collaboration is the norm. Transparency is the safeguard. The broader implication is sobering. If evidence can be withheld in one case, what precedent does that set for the next? If cooperation can be suspended in moments of controversy, what happens to the public's faith in equal justice? The American system does not survive on power alone. It survives on legitimacy. And legitimacy is earned through openness, through accountability, through the willingness to be examined. Blumenthal closed with a call for reform, common sense restraints, and structural overhaul where necessary. Not vengeance, not spectacle, reform. Because institutions do not correct themselves automatically, they are corrected through oversight, through hearings like this, through voices willing to ask difficult questions in full view of the public. In that chamber, beneath the bright lights and the formal decorum, something fundamental was exposed. Not just the details of two tragic deaths, but the fragility of coordination between governments, the ease with which trust can erode, the urgency of restoring it. The people of Minnesota and the nation beyond deserve more than procedural reassurances. They deserve a process that is fair, thorough, and joint. They deserve investigations that leave no doubt about integrity. Because when life is lost, the only acceptable response is clarity. This moment was not simply about one agency or one case. It was about the principle that no authority in America is beyond review. That evidence belongs not to a department, but to the pursuit of truth. That justice, to remain justice, must be visible. The question now is whether the system will rise to meet that standard. For continued in-depth coverage and analysis of the hearings shaping our nation's future, subscribe to Liberty Report USA. Support our work to expose the truth.